Hello and welcome to Three Questions with. Got my friend Jack Wang with us. Jack Wang is a college financial aid strategist. Jack, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Kevin. I really appreciate it.
So Jack, every time I have you on the show, I always kind of start laughing, because you'll see someone will have a baby and there's always that person in the room to say, you should start planning for college. Really? The day they're born? Is that when I should start, really?
Yeah, that's what everybody thinks, right? Because you think about how much college costs and stuff. The reality is, I mean, yes, if you can start saving the day they're born, or even perhaps a little bit before they're born, that obviously helps. The reality is, of course, not many people think quite that far ahead. I know I didn't. But the flip side is what most people do is they don't really think about it till like junior year, maybe tail end of junior year, beginning senior year of high school, because that, people are talking about submitting applications and stuff. And so realistically is, if you didn't start when they were a baby or when they're really young, that's fine. But it starts sooner than junior year of high school. So in many cases, it starts as early as freshman year or even eighth grade to prepare your finances. And I don't mean just shove a bunch of money in a savings account or whatever to save, but there are things that families can do, but sometimes they take time. So you want to start early. The other thing is, if a student or family was really aiming at, let's say, the Ivy League type of schools, right? The upper tier or close to that level of school, the old thinking of like, oh yeah, good grades, good test scores got you into these schools. The reality is, good grades and good test scores just prevent your application from getting shredded right away. Okay, that's like the minimum bar. But they're now looking for kids who do things outside of school, who start their own nonprofits, who start their own clubs, who are national or ranked number one in the region for whatever thing. And to prepare for that, that starts as early as eighth to ninth grade, right? Because if you think about you and I, right? Like, oh, you're an adult now, or you're like a high school graduate and you start your own little organization to do whatever. Yes, that's great and sounds very impressive. But if you look at the stories of who these schools take, oh, it's this 14-year-old or who's a 14-year-old who started this program to feed the homeless in their community. Well, we're all impressed with that, right? Like, right? And that's the level that these families have to play at if you're aiming at that level. So that's why you have to start so much earlier than you might otherwise think if you didn't start the day they were born.
Makes sense. So Jack, I find that most people, when we talk about college, we talk about cost. What's it going to cost? Is there such a thing as a question that people should be asking that they're not asking?
Yeah, and I get this all the time. For the most part, students and families and guidance counselors are all focused on, all right, what school should I apply to? Where can I get in, right? And all the questions that fall under that, like, do I have to take an SAT or ACT test? How do schools look at extracurricular activities? How many clubs do I need? How many letters of recommendation? All that stuff. And of course, hoping for scholarships. The part that families don't really think about, and this also starts early, like eighth, ninth grade, but is often never asked is, how am I going to pay for this? Right? Okay, like when a kid gets in to wherever school, leaving whatever bill after financial aid or scholarships, how am I actually going to pay for this? Because one of the most common things that people ask me, or you see this on social media, is after their kid gets in and gets their financial aid letters, you get something like, well, I'm so proud of my son or daughter. They worked really hard and they got into XYZ school, but we didn't get a lot of aid or didn't get a huge scholarship. So it left this huge balance. We don't know what to do now, right? That's like the number one question, like winter to spring. And so to really be able to address it, you got to start thinking about it a lot earlier, whether you have to borrow for it, or using it from savings, or a combination of both, or whatever. You got to know that in advance, right? You don't want to leave it till the end and then find out, oh my goodness, I can't afford this.
So Jack, a lot of families ask their family and friends, hey, tell me about paying for college. Tell me about going to college. If there is such a thing as, what is the biggest misconception you see with people when it comes to college?
Yeah. One of, this is going to sound very logical, very practical, but doesn't really have any basis in reality. Um, because college, paying for college and just the dollars involved are so different than back when you and I were there, right? And um, I often hear things like, well, I as the parent, I'll contribute X dollars. But hey, kid, if you go somewhere, if you decide to go somewhere that costs more than that, then the rest of that is on your own, right? Whether it's another 5,000 or 50,000, kid, you got to figure it out. And so the misconception there is that it sounds really rational, right? Like I'm putting that responsibility onto the kid to make a good decision because they're the ones going to be responsible. Yes, logically, that's correct. The reality is that is just simply not correct because the kid can't do it. Your 18-year-old can't borrow money for $50,000 or whatever. Okay. They're limited in what they can do. The other thing that's kind of related to that is parents will say, all right, fine. Hey kid, you can borrow that $50,000, but of course, no bank is going to lend an 18-year-old that kind of money. So the bank is going to require a cosigner. And so many parents, otherwise highly intelligent people, say like, "Oh yeah, I'm just gonna I co-sign for my kid, but it's their loan."
Hmm.
And I have to remind them that's not exactly how it works, right? And I get calls like this, like, "Hey, my kid, my kid took out a loan. I co-signed. Now they can't pay because of XYZ reasons, or they got a job but doesn't pay enough. Now the bank's coming after me as the co-signer. What do I do?" I'm like,
Pay it.
pay it. Like, I mean, like that,
Not an
like
option.
that's what a cosigner is, right? Like you're responsible if the first person doesn't pay. And so that is a big misconception that they think like, oh yeah, this is my kid's loan. This is my kid's loan. Nah, doesn't work that way. You're on the hook, pal.
Yeah. Like I said, welcome to banking 101. So cool.
Exactly.
So Jack, what's the best way for people to reach out to you? How can they learn more?
Best ways people can reach me via email, which is the most common and best way for me. My email is Jack at innovativewealth.com.
Jack, really appreciate you taking a few minutes to call into the show. And as always, thanks for being my friend.
Thank you, Kevin.